Okay. No. Let's go ahead and get started. Hello. Hello. Hey, good morning, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. One. There we go. Hey, there we go. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. So I want to, on behalf of my colleagues at E3G, welcome you to the 2026 State of Climate Politics Forum. My name is Clarence Edwards. I'm the Executive Director for E3G in the United States and your host for this morning's event. Some practical issues first. The Met Office has issued an amber weather warning for extreme heat in London today. I think it's going to be about 38. To my American ears, that sounds like wintertime, but I know in Celsius is absolutely not wintertime. So it's really important for you to stay, you know this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Stay hydrated. We have water for you outside. There's sodas, but it's really important to stay hydrated. Dehydration can sneak up on you, so be careful. Restrooms are one level down in case you need those after you're hydrating. It's ironic that this heat is joining us, not so much in the room, it feels cooler than last year, but the heat is the backdrop for the conversation we're going to have this morning about climate change and where we are with the politics of it, as I said. Today, we're going to learn about climate action from the local to global level. We'll hear from a new generation of climate leaders. We'll consider how to connect the energy transition to the lives and concerns of everyday people around the world, and hear thoughts on strengthening, rebuilding, and renewing international cooperation. We have an information-filled morning for you that we believe and we hope that you will find thought-provoking. We're going to get started right away here with our opening keynote on responding to the climate emergency, and that will be given by Ramon Mendez-Galan, president of REN 21 and the former Energy Secretary of Uruguay. So if you join me up here, that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. It's a big honor for me to be here today to share my thoughts about the paradoxical moment that we are living now concerning the climate politics. Because on the one side, thanks to the climate efforts, we have developed new technologies in many areas, which are today more efficient, better, and even cheaper than the old ones. But at the same time, paradoxically, we are witnessing a setback of the climate ambition. And the energy sector is perhaps one of the best examples of that. So I will try to share this, to illustrate this with an example of what happened in my country, Uruguay, when many people are now calling the Uruguayan energy revolution. Because in a short period of time, we went from about 50% share of fossil fuels in the power mix to only about 2% now. And this happened in only 5 years. Thank you. This is the power mix of 2024, when we reach an incredible share of 99.1% of a combination of different renewable sources, not only traditional hydro, but also half of that being new variable renewable energies. And this is to be compared with the world average, which is only about 30%. But what's more interesting that the fact that we proved that it is possible to share such a mix is that we reduce costs with that. Not only will we reduce, but we halve costs, which are now of the order of only 5 euro cents per kilowatt-hour generation cost. But even more important than reducing cost is stabilizing cost, because we don't suffer any more of those crazy fluctuations of energy commodity prices, because we are just dependent on our own domestic and free sources. We haven't witnessed any kind of impact of the war in Ukraine or the war in Iran so far. Not at all. We do not depend on that. And the benefits are no longer just for the energy sector, but for the whole economy. We created 50,000 new jobs in this transition. This is, for a small country like Uruguay, it's about 3% of the total labor force of the country. Make a calculation how much is 3% of the labor force of your country to see the impact for the economy. And we are also receiving incomes for the export of renewable energy surpluses to our two giant neighbors for us, which are Argentina and Brazil. Last but not least, this impact has allowed us to increase the energy border of the country, because today 99.9% of our country is electrified, of our houses are electrified. And of course, when we have such a power mix, the impacts are going just beyond the electricity sector, because we take the primary mix, which means all the end users of the energy we can have. We are having today 63% of renewables in the mix, which is large compared to the world average, which is only 14%. In fact, we use, for example, biomass waste, which used to be a climate, environmental liability, and now is a energy asset. For example, in the industrial sector, where almost 80% of all the end-use energy used in the industrial sector is renewable. And we are only using oil as almost the only fossil fuel in the mix, and mainly all of that in the transport sector. And not for a long time, because last month, more than half of the new sold cars were EVs. So this is the possibility that you can have when you go to renewables in your grid. And your mix in general, in the power mix in general. I used to say that I'm a kind of decarbonized person, because I use 99% renewable electricity at both home and office. I use air conditioning, heat pumps in order to heat my house. I'm using NEV and paying only $5 to fully charge my battery, and with that I can run 500 kilometers. This is the present technology we're having today in the world. And there's one single word I haven't mentioned so far, which is climate. I'm just talking about economic works, development. But of course, just by the way, a just energy transition is possible. This is what we proved. We proved that yes, it was possible to manage the variability of wind and solar, for example. Human engineering has succeeded to put a man in the moon 50 years ago. And they're trying to convince them that it was not possible to manage variability of wind and solar. Of course it is. It was not rocket science, it was complicated, but it was not rocket science. But not only is possible, but it is better. Once again, renewables are ripe to provide very extraordinary benefits at the national level, just beyond climate, because I didn't mention climate. By the way, yes, our emissions, per capita emissions, at least in the power sector, are 40 times smaller than the world average. Yes, it is possible to decarbonize an economy. So the point is that today, what we are calling the renewable-based economy, the renewable development, is ready. They are ready to deliver. And this is even better and better as time is passing by, because only in the last 15 years, the most important renewable technologies, mainly wind offshore, solar PV, and batteries, they have decreased by tremendous amount. Solar PV decreased cost by 8 times, wind by 3 times, and batteries 10 times lower cost than they used to be only 15 years ago. And today, which is interesting, is that wind onshore and solar, they are producing electricity at lower cost as any kind of fossil fuels. And this happens in any place in the world, almost any place. Even in fossil fuel producer countries, even in those countries, wind and solar are the cheapest source of producing electricity today. So in fact, yes, today renewables, first of all, they allow us a reliable and secure operation of energy system. In Uruguay, we have been running that for the last 10 years. If you have any doubt, someone tells you that is not possible, please ask him to pay a ticket plane. I pay the ticket plane. And they go to Uruguay to witness that this is happening really in our world. But on top of that, this reduces the cost of the systems. And even better, this reduces exposure to the geopolitical shocks that are witnessed today all over the world. And that, of course, beyond the fact that we are reducing the emissions in the sector. And this is even more and more important in these complicated moments that we are living today. But this is one side of the coin. The other side is that, in fact, we're not witnessing a really transition as we're expecting to happen. This is not happening at the pace we not only we expect because of climate change, but also that we expect because of real facts. So what is really going on today with climate politics all over the world? And in fact, my vision is that there are at least 3 very difficult, formidable problems that transition is facing today in the world. The first one has to do with the narrative. Perhaps all of us, we are convinced of what I shared today. But this is not the dominant narrative. There's a dominant narrative which is still saying that it's not possible to live without fossil fuels, that it's not possible to deal with climate, with the variability of wind and solar and variable sources, that if you use batteries, this becomes more expensive. This is not true, but this is the dominant narrative. And the second point is that there are strong market distortions in our economies. This is the global direct subsidy to fossil fuels. We don't talk that much about this crucial aspect. Fossil fuels are subsidized all over the world, and subsidies can be as high as $1.4 trillion per year. And at the same time, where renewable technology were decreasing cost, at the same time, subsidies to fossil fuels were increasing by a factor of 3 in only 8 years. And this is not IRENA, this is not Greenpeace, this is not E3G which is saying that. It is the International Monetary Fund. Because the International Monetary Fund is very worried because of the fact that if we add direct plus indirect subsidies to fossil fuels, this is about $7 trillion per year. This is 7% of the world GDP. This means that 7% of all the wealth we are generating every year, 7% goes to subsidize one specific sector of our economy. That's why the IMF is so worried about that. And beyond just these 2 things, beyond the fact that we are having a dominant narrative and the markets are completely distorted, there's a third formidable problem, which is the fact that, in fact, we are using inadequate rules of the game for renewables. The rules of the game has been built according to the characteristic of fossil fuel, and that's fine because they were the winners till a short time ago. But today what is happening is that we're asking renewables to compete with inadequate rules of the game, and those rules of the game has been done specifically to favor fossil fuels. What you are doing today with renewables is like taking the best, but then when he comes, instead of giving him a football ball, we are giving him a tennis racket and putting it in a tennis court. This is what we are doing. And no matter which is the best that you're choosing, no matter who it is, it's the same. The point is that renewables cannot deliver because today what is happening is that the influence of incumbents, the influence of fossil fuel stakeholders is too strong. That's why we have all these formidable barriers. And that's why, I mean, just because it's cheaper doesn't mean that transition is going to happen spontaneously. So in fact, what can we do? What can we do in this context? And please let me go back a little bit to Uruguay and to understand what were the real reason, the key success in the Uruguay case. And in fact, I can organize this on only 2 of them. The first one is the fact that we understood that we needed sustained public policies and stable public policies in order to make it possible. So first of all, we built a new narrative which was based in real facts of the benefits that the transition can have to our own national interest. And the second is that with that, based in this new narrative, we built a political agreement that was backed by the entire Uruguayan political system. And we have witnessed this transition and the continuity of these policies from different governments going from right to left and left to right, and over Many governments will continue in the same direction because it was the best for our own interest, no matter what the constituency votes. And third point is that, in fact, there was a very strong government leadership working hand with the private sector in order to build the transformative ecosystem for the new economy to get ready. And precisely the second and most important point is that it's not only a political decision. We need to make changes for the new economy to emerge. And for that, we had to make technical changes in the way we plan the system, in the way we operate the system, but also changes in the market design. We deeply redefined the market design, going from the traditional short-term energy market to long-term capacity market. We changed everything, and this attracted billions of dollars. In fact, in Uruguay, we received in only 5 years, 6 billion euros. 5 billion euros, $6 billion. And this is about 12% of the GDP of the country. It has a tremendous a tremendous attraction. It's a global south country that, creating the appropriate conditions, succeeded to attract all the investment needed in order to make a rapid change. So what should our action plan be? And just to finish, first of all, we need to talk a new driver. I'm a climate man. I'm the chief negotiator of the Paris Agreement for my country. But I never talk about climate. I've talked in their language: economy, resilience, stability, so all the issues that really matters to politicians now, which are the real facts for today. And with that, we need to create a new narrative. We cannot accept the old narrative that this was not possible. Yes, now it's possible and it's better. And with that, create a long-term political agreement. Long-term political agreements are crucial. Many countries are worried because there is a concentration of raw materials and supply chains, but those countries have those concentrations. They have long-term policies. We need to have long-term policies that are backed by the entire political system, based on the real facts that these new technologies are about development, not just about climate change. Development in the global sense. We are all development countries because we have to all to develop a new economy. But after that, of course, we have to remove all the barriers that we have today in order to make it possible for the new economy to emerge. And last but not least, for that, we need strong political leadership with new, broad and diversified alliances in order to make it possible all over the world. So my message is, it's no longer time for having political targets. It's implementation time. And this is what we're doing with both my organization and which is EVI, which are sharing these experiences to other countries of the Global South and through the global network I chair, which is REN 21. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ramon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent way. Ooh, water. Water's coming out of my head. Excellent way to get the day started. We're going to move on from that excellent start to a conversation around how climate action evolves as it becomes an increasingly important part of the factor in the geopolitical landscape. This next panel will delve into this question. Be led by my colleague Jure Yada, E3G's Director of Strategic Member State Engagement and Head of EU Sustainable Finance, for a panel on connecting the dots on geopolitics and climate action. So Jure.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to be moderating this first panel of today's forum, which takes us straight into a critical binary, which is geopolitics and climate action. In this rapidly shifting world, geopolitics and climate have become increasingly intertwined. We have seen that geopolitical ruptures are affecting the way we both conduct climate cooperation and also drive climate action multilaterally. And it has also affected the way that the dynamics on the ground have shaped up to enable us to deliver climate action in the real world. Yet at the same time, rarely has the global geopolitical imperative to achieve climate transition been as strong, and I think we can all agree that we have felt that very strongly in the current context of the energy crisis. So what all of this means is that we are navigating a new reality in which cooperation and collaboration has not slowed, but has been adapted, is adapting, and it has been reimagined by political leaders, by diplomats, by others who are looking and finding opportunities for pragmatic solutions and ways that we can advance the transition amid the multiple challenges we are currently facing. And these are many, and we have heard already about some of them this morning. So I am truly delighted to be joined by our eminent panelists for this discussion, who are all current and former government leaders, national ministers, high-level officials, and who have dedicated their careers to driving climate cooperation globally, regionally, and nationally. And I am very happy to introduce them, starting on my right, His Excellency Saranga Whipps Jr., who is the President of the Republic of Palau, one of the world's most climate vulnerable countries and one with a very rich natural ecosystem. President, your country is also currently chairing the negotiating bloc of the Alliance of Small Island States within the climate negotiations, really driving the efforts to keep warming to 1.5 degrees. We have next to the President, Dr. Dino Pati Jalal, who's former Indonesian Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs and the founder and chairman of the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, which is a foreign policy network of 100,000 experts, the biggest in the Indo-Pacific region. Welcome. Next to Dr. Jalal, we have Ms. Anna Tony, who is the CEO of COP30 and who led the first climate conference after the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement last year, with all of that implied. Ms. Tony has served as Brazil's National Secretary for Climate Change and is the founder and executive director of the Climate and Society Institute in Brazil. And last but not least, we have His Excellency Hassan Mohamed Moalin, State Minister of Industry of Ethiopia, which is the host of next year's COP32. And with 30 years of experience in national politics, Minister Hassan is also a member of the House of People's Representatives and has previously also served as State Minister of Trade and Regional Integration. So a very warm welcome to you all. We have a limited amount of time to tackle what is a very big question. So without further ado, I'd like to invite you, President Whipps, to start us off with your reflections. How are you seeing geopolitics and climate interact in a fragmented world?
Testing. Thank you, moderator, and I want to thank E3G for framing this critical discussion. You know, there was once a famous leader that walked these streets, Sir Winston Churchill, and he said, "One should never let a good crisis go to waste." Lately, the world has been gripped by what many are calling an energy crisis. But let us be entirely accurate. This is not an energy crisis. It is a fossil fuel crisis. The recent hostilities and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz have laid bare a fundamental flaw in our global architecture. The trouble is that even nations making heroic leaps in the energy transition, like Pakistan, with its incredible solar revolution, remain dangerously tethered to the volatility of oil and gas to run everyday life. In the wide expanses of the great blue Pacific, we don't just read about supply chain shocks, we bleed them. Small island developing states typically spend 10% of their GDP on importing fossil fuels. In Palau, it's 13%, and in Tuvalu, it's 20%. When oil prices spike, we have zero diplomatic levers to pull and no raw power to influence global supply chains. We're just the recipients. The recent choke point disruptions force us to trigger our own regional emergency response mechanism under what we call the Baitakawa Declaration. And the Marshall Islands recently declared a national emergency, and others have implemented strict fuel rationing. Across our islands, citizens drew a collective inward gasp as we were recalling the acute vulnerability we felt during the height of COVID-19. The crisis is not a reason to take a backward step. It is the ultimate reason to double down. The worst thing any nation can do right now is to dig deeper into fossil fuels. We must leave them in the ground and embrace the superior, cheaper, and entirely dependable technology that sun, wind, and storage provide. Every dollar invested in renewables today is a dollar invested in ensuring that a geopolitical shockwave can never paralyze our economies again. Last month in Port Moresby, Pacific Energy ministers declared a shared vision to achieve 100% renewable energy future for the Blue Pacific. We intend to be the first region in the world to get there. Embracing this future is a national security imperative, a shield against external shocks, and a driver for development. These words apply equally, I think, just to about every region represented on this panel today. We need more than global goals. We need demonstrable, practical solutions. And I deeply welcome the leadership of my fellow panelists, Ana Tony, and Brazil's vital work in stewarding the roadmap to a transition away from fossil fuels, alongside the Santa Marta process. On the demand side, the Electrify Now initiative, launching here this afternoon, is undoubtedly a major step in the right direction. But to turn roadmaps into reality, we must fund the pipeline. When Palau hosts the Pacific Island Forum Leaders meeting in September, we will launch the Pacific Renewable Energy Investment Prospectus to provide clear visibility on leading investment-ready projects to our global partners. We are living in turbulent times. The temptation to retreat into isolation is great, but we reject it unequivocally. The answer to fragmentation is not to cooperate less, but it is to cooperate better and more effectively. In a fossil fuel era, geopolitics have always wagged the tail of the climate dog. The unstoppable renewables transition allows us to flip that script. It allows nations large and small to harness true energy sovereignty and break free from the crippling reliance on others. Working closer together, we can move toward true energy security, self-sufficiency, and a safer climate for all. Sula, thank you.
Thank you very much, President Whipps, for sharing with us the critical nature of moving both from and navigating a context of crisis into going to cooperation, to implementation, and also sharing Palau's leadership regionally and internationally to drive these efforts. I think the message is clear. It is about cooperation and how we find the path forward for that and for implementation in this increasingly fractured context. So with that, let me turn to Ms. Tony. COP30 saw the launch of the Global Implementation Accelerator, among many other outcomes, some of them already referenced by President Whipps. And this is a mechanism to facilitate cooperation on real-world delivery for climate action. Can you share with us, as we reflect on the space for doing such cooperation and implementation on the ground, what lessons and challenges have you already observed among those who are translating climate commitments into real-world action on the ground? And if I may, are there any lessons from your own successful leadership of COP30 that you can share with us on how to drive unity in a time of complex engagements between different actors?
Thank you very much. What a pleasure to be here. I want to start congratulating E3G and the London Climate Week, because this is like real geopolitics. We are all here moving, and this is really impressed that you have doubled the size of the London Climate Week, so it's a real pleasure to be here, especially in the panel with Ethiopia, Indonesia, and especially Palau, representing the small islands. And I wanted to thank you, Ms. President, in the name of I think all of us, for the leadership of the small islands in maintaining the topic and science and 1.5 throughout, and for all the support you gave us at COP30. So thank you very, very much. And it's quite interesting that we are here. And I obviously couldn't start this without remind us that this is hotter than Belém. So London is now hotter than Belém. I thought it would be difficult, but the air conditioning is working better than we managed there. But it's really hot. But we are in a transition of the geopolitics. Just by this panel having countries from the south sitting here to say our perspective from the geopolitics, I think we already heard how we can make of this crisis an opportunity to really put what is happening in our countries. And what is happening in our countries is that we have incorporated climate into our development path. There is no doubt. We know that we have to develop with now the constraints, because we wanted to be sustainable growth. So there is no doubt. There is no lack of ambition from our side, and I think many of our NDCs have shown that. But yet, the word is the ecosystem of implementation is not there. So we have now some instruments within the UNFCCC, and we are hoping that they will get even stronger. Yes, we propose the accelerator that will choose very small number of topics to push for positive tipping points. We have the mission, Belém Mission 1.5. We have the action agenda now that has agreed on a 5-year plan to bring together and give continuity for private sector, civil society, subnational governments to work on the same topics for at least 5 years, linked to the GST1. So we have the climate weeks, and we have many instruments within the UNFCCC. But we need to look at the instruments we have that are outside of the UNFCCC that needs to be aligned to the goals of the Paris Agreement. Multilateral development banks is an obvious one. We need to do that reform, and it needs to be quicker, the reform. We obviously doing the roadmap of 1.3 trillion to show that mobilization of resources needs to come to developing countries, as I said, to support a development path that is aligned to 1.5. But I wanted to now finalize talking about the roadmap. In Belém was quite tension. There was a lot of tension about, yes, are we going to have the roadmaps in the negotiation, yes or no? I think for anybody that understands negotiation knew that that would be almost impossible. But what we really intended as COP30 is that to make the discussion about transitioning away from fossil fuel not a taboo. We have already agreed on transitioning away from fossil fuel in COP28. So it's no longer a question of if, it's a question of how. And as we heard the Secretary General today, it's going to happen. Should we plan for that? We need roadmaps. We needed to talk about, to look on how dependent we are from fossil fuel, not only because of energy, but for finance, for the demands of our industries, our transportation. So the roadmap that COP30 is going to be delivering at the end of the year looks at the how, what needs to be done in terms of economic issues, nationally and internationally, on demand, nationally and internationally, and obviously about production of the countries. We are very close to the Santa Marta process. This afternoon, we are going to have a meeting between the Santa Marta and COP30 presidency to show that we are together. But I think the most important is looking at GST2, what we needed to do in that small paragraph at the moment, paragraph 28. We probably will need pages of how to go forward in terms of delivering what was already agreed, which is transitioning away from fossil fuel. So count with COP30 to continue this debate, obviously together with Ethiopia, Turkey, and Australia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ana Tony. You've raised the important question of coalitions of the willing, of really looking at momentum where there is momentum. And I think it's more widespread than we sometimes realize in some of the conversations and some of the rhetoric, the narratives, as the previous speaker was talking about. And I think it's quite critical to understand that there is now this opportunity to take a whole of economy approach, really start implementing the roadmaps that you were talking about, understand that we have the tools and opportunities to mitigate the disruptions that are in the external environment. And on this point, I'd like to bring you in, Dr. Jalal, on the question of this other side of the geopolitical complexity that we face, which is the high vulnerability of green supply chains, of technology, to disruptions relating to the external geopolitical environment. Indonesia is a country with rich critical raw materials necessary for the transition, and it's also in the region of Asia, which in many ways is setting the pace for the energy transition. So could you share with us how, as Indonesia, and also how you see middle powers navigating and taking approaches to developing partnerships that also allow them to preserve strategic autonomy?
Well, thank you very much, E3G, for convening this panel. I want to raise one big picture that we need to be mindful of, and that is the fact that, in my view, climate change is being pushed to the margins now of world affairs. And this is mainly due to, one, the fact that geopolitics is king. You know, in Paris Treaty 2015, climate change was king, right? But since then, geopolitical insecurity has dominated the attention of a number of world leaders, and as a result, resources that could be used for climate change and SDG is being depleted, right? And that is a structural challenge for us. And the geopolitical insecurity and competition is seen as more urgent, a lot more urgency than climate and SDG. And I think that's a fundamental challenge for world politics. And the other reason is that for a number of countries in the global south, maybe in the global north as well, but including in Indonesia, climate change does not sell in elections, right? We've done a lot to convince politicians, put climate change in your political promise, and many of them say, no, it doesn't get us votes. So we gotta get through that problem honestly, yeah. And the hope lies in what you say, the middle powers, because with the US retreating, China is rising, obviously, but the real shaper, a significant shaper of world affairs now lie in the 20 or so middle powers in the global south and in the north that have the economic, technological, diplomatic, and political capacity to shape the next world order, including on climate change. Most of the middle powers in the north and the south have net zero targets, and they account among the G20 countries about 35% of global emissions. And even they are now hosting the next COP31, yeah? Australia Turkey, and Australia. So they have much greater capacity to shape the climate diplomacy. Indonesia is among these countries. We wanted to create a more green supply chain and technology. As you said, we have established what was called JETP, which is a $20 billion package to clean our energy supply, take out coal, but the US pulled out, and now it's in limbo. Yeah. So the question is now how do we re-energize the renewables? The 100 gigawatt renewable now will rely mostly on China. Yeah, because China has the finance and the technology, especially on solar, but we don't want to be dependent on China, right? We want to look more on other countries, Japan and Korea and others. But what you said about strategic autonomy is true, but we see it more as strategic versatility, because we don't want to be tied to anybody, and the fact that we have autonomy means we can be transactional and look into all kinds of directions to achieve our climate goals.
Thank you, Dr. Jalal. I think that's one we'll remember, strategic versatility, and that actually brings me nicely to you, Minister Hassan. We just heard about the dependencies, but also the complexities of trying to diversify, working with like-minded partners, especially among middle powers. For a rapidly developing economy like Ethiopia, how are you navigating the protection of your domestic industry and its agenda and its transition from these external disruptions? And if I may, with an eye to the COP32 next year, is green industrialization likely to be a priority? What can you share with us?
Thank you. Thank you, Moderator. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. It is a great pleasure and an honor to participate in this important discussion on industrial transformation, resource sovereignty, and the evolving relationship between geopolitics and the climate action. We meet at a time when the global economy is undergoing profound transformation. The transition to low carbon future is reshaping trade, investment, industrial production, and technological development. At the same time, geopolitical tensions, supply chain disruption, and increasing competition over the strategic resource are creating new challenges and uncertainties across the world. For developing countries in Africa, these changes present both significant opportunities and complex challenges. The growing demand for critical minerals, clean energy technologies, and sustainable industrial production offers tremendous potential for economic growth and industrial development. However, it also raises important questions regarding source security, technology access, industrial competitiveness, and equitable participation in global value chains. For Ethiopia, our objective is clear. We seek not merely to participate in global chain, but to ensure that industrialization drives structural transformation, creates quality jobs, strengthening technological capabilities, and improves the livelihoods of our people. To achieve this vision, Ethiopia is pursuing several strategic priorities. First, we are strengthening and diversifying our international partnership in an increasingly fragmented global environment. Resource resilience requires broad-based and mutually beneficial cooperation that promotes investment, technology transfer, and industrial collaboration. Second, we are committed moving up to value chains. Developing countries should not remain suppliers of raw materials while importing high-value manufactured products. Local value addition, import substitution, and industrial upgrading are essential for creating jobs, retaining economic value, and enhancing competitiveness. Third, through our 10 years prospective development plan, homegrown economic reform agenda, and Made in Ethiopia movements are expanding domestic manufacturing and strengthening strategic sectors, including renewable energy, agro-processing, pharmaceuticals, digital technologies, and sustainable manufacturing. Fourth, we recognize that regional integration is indispensable. The African continent free trade area provides a historic opportunity to expand markets, strengthen regional supply chains, attract investment, and build more resilient industrial ecosystem across Africa. At the same time, climate action remains central to our development agenda. Ethiopia views green industrialization not as a constraint on a growth, but as a pathway to sustainable and inclusive development. Our investments in renewable energy, including hydropower, wind, geothermal sources, e-mobility, and the green legacy initiatives are helping to build one of the cleanest energy systems in Africa, creating a strong foundation for a low-carbon industrial growth. As we look to the future, Ethiopia is honored to prepare to host COP32 after Turkey. Ethiopia looks forward to working closely with their partners to advance ambitious and practical solutions that support both climate action, sustainable development. COP32 should serve as a platform for meaningful dialogue to strengthen climate finance, technology transfer, and the capacity building efforts that enables development countries to accelerate this green industrialization transition. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, no country achieves this objective alone. International cooperation remains essential. The global transition must be fair, inclusive, and supportive for local value addition. It should not replicate historical patterns where resources are extracted from developing countries, while higher value manufacturing and technological benefits remains concentrated elsewhere. In conclusion, the future belongs to countries that can successfully connect industrial development, climate action, technological innovation, and regional cooperation, which is very important. Ethiopia's vision is not simply one of the resource ownership, but for productive sovereignty, the ability to transform resource, technology, and the human talents into sustainable growth and shared prosperity. By strengthening partnership, advancing green industrialization, promoting regional integration, and investing in our people, we believe that developing countries can transform today's challenges into tomorrow's opportunity. I thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister, and also for giving us some thoughts on what COP32 next year may be shaped around. And with that on an eye to the future, we are at the end of this panel discussion, and I think we have heard that climate competes with geopolitics at times in the framing, in the resourcing, but the solution to geopolitical disruption is also through climate, and I think we've heard that very strongly along with the clear message not to stop cooperation, but to reinvent it, to find the spaces where it can exist and become stronger. So please join me in warmly thanking our panelists.
Wangari Maathai said, "No matter how dark the cloud, there's always a thin silver lining." And that is what we must look for. the silver lining will come, if not to us, then to the next generation or the generation after that. And maybe with that generation, the lining will no longer be thin. I thought that was a fitting quote for setting up our next conversation, which will be led by Camilla Bourne, CEO of Electrify Britain, with 2 youth climate champions carrying this work forward, Marcel Oliveira and Sally Higgins.
Have you got yours? We'll try and be loud anyway, because this room is beautiful but very echoey. Hi. So we today are going to be talking a bit about the role of young people in the international diplomatic process. And we hope this will be a little bit of levity, a little bit of energy, a little bit of dynamism to the program that we will try to bring. So first of all, I'm going to ask these two on stage, but I'd also like the whole audience to do this too. I'd like you to spend a moment thinking about what is it that brought you originally to working on climate change? Okay, now I'm going to come to you guys to answer first, but hold that all in your heads. Do you want to go first?
So when I think of climate change, the first thing that I think of is actually, for me, climate change was just about nature and living with nature. And the first person who probably told me about the importance of living with nature is actually my grandma. She's about 85 now. She lives back in Australia. She's a crazy Irish woman, but she's been my best friend and a mentor for my life. And I grew up in a small country town in Australia, about 2 hours driving inland from Brisbane, depending on how good your geography is of Australia on the east coast. And the town that I grew up in and where my grandparents live, there's about 1,000 people there, and it's a small farming community. So it's the kind of community where you grow up realising that the community and the economy is dependent to and tied in with nature from the very start. Because you see that when there's droughts and it doesn't rain, the whole community suffers. And you see that when it's really hot and there's dust storms, you can't go to school. And you see that when it's so dry that there's no drinking water, everyone, including the animals, also suffer. So I think living in a farming region taught me from the very start that we depend on nature. When I think about those early moments of when I understood that that was about the changing climate, it's my nana, and it's when she would tell me that, you know, oh, it's May, and I know we're on the other side of the hemisphere, so for us that's winter, and she would say to me, like, oh, we haven't had a frost yet, you know, things are changing. And it's those stories about nature and about nature changing that I think is when climate becomes just a conversation about the real things. And so for me, that's what I think about, is those early conversations with my grandma about her life in the community, what's changed to my life, and it's like real observations and lived experience.
I think for me, the climate change always was there in my life, with the hot waves, with the floods, with a real impact, because I'm from Brazil, from Latin America, so the impact always was there, but also was in the ancestrality about the relationship with the nature, and also the value of the people protecting the nature on the ground. And I think when I come for this space, beautiful place, to be honest, but it's like, we have a lot of space when the people are literally making the climate action. It is sometimes it's not considered in negotiations decisions, or considered in the people talk about climate action. And my question is always, why not? So the way I understand about climate change was with cultural practices, was with festivals, poetries, and round of conversations to protect one green park in my community, because I am from one peripheral, one urban context. So I didn't understand about the nature around me. It was not clear the relationship. But since one time you understand, you never forget everything around you is also nature. You can be inside concrete spaces, but one day that space also was nature. And someone make decisions about take off the trees, take off the rivers, and create this concept about economic development and sustainable development, but it's sustainable for who, when, and where. So for me, the climate change also is the impact we face like young people, is the environmental racism, is lived in our lives, is the misinformation, the negationism around us. But the most important thing is the reconnection, and I'm really happy to say I reconnect with the nature around me, and because of that, my family also reconnect, my community also reconnect, and now we have one green park in my neighborhood. So I think this is one great way to say about climate change and climate action. Sometimes need to be in the high level, but sometimes, most parts of the times, need to be in the local. It's there when the nature and the people are.
Yeah, it's so important, that relationship that we have with one another and how we bring climate into that. You know, we are the most trusted messengers to our friends and family. So if we experience it, it's so important to share that. You know, it's interesting to hear you because I'm now not youth, but I was a youth climate activist. And for me, I was privileged enough, I guess it's also where I'm come from, I'm from the UK, to learn about it at school. And when I learned about it at school, I was like, this is nuts. Like, this is totally unfair. I got taught there's some greenhouse gases, and then there's some, we'll fix it with some solar panels and some wind turbines. And I was like, what? Like, and then let's move on. Like, no, we have to focus. This makes no sense. But then this morning, I dropped my 1-year-old son off at his childminder, and I had to be sending them messages saying, this is the network for cool spaces in London. Because he, like you guys, will only ever live climate change. And I think that's something that's coming so much more into the political conversation now and has such power and such impact. So that brings us to the international process, which feels often very disconnected from these kind of lived experiences, this passion that comes from seeing the injustice in it. What do you think the international climate process gets right? Who wants to go first? Then we can talk about how it gets wrong. But first of all, I want to hear about what it gets right.
I think Marceli are both optimists, so I think this is good. We're happy to start with what's right, and I think you have to be an optimist in this space. But I think what it gets right is like this, like the fact that Marceli and I get to have this opportunity this year in COP to work together, learn from each other. The fact that we've only known each other for 8 weeks in this formal multilateral process, but you know, when we talk about things like my grandma, or Marceli's park and her home region, it's like, I think let's not forget that beside all the noise that happens in the international spaces, like it's human to human, and we connect through the families, our connection to nature, and I think like for all the noise that is created about the failures in the broader system, like we're still here and we're friends and we get to connect over that and think about creating this moment together. So I think facilitating those connections is so powerful, and I think that's what this space can provide.
I like this. That's nice. I think also have one important conversation to all us do about what is the international cooperation and if our life will be better without UN, because a lot of people are talking about this. We don't trust, we don't want to be inside, we don't to connect. But for many years was the infrastructure of the cooperation. So in your time to cooperate, everybody will say don't work anymore. In our time to be young persons, being climate activists and working this system, don't have more space, don't have more funds, don't have, in your time. So I think also have one important conversation to understand what's the future we want and where this future we will build. Because it's absolutely fine if we create another systems, another spaces, another political way to understand the life. But if we say we are angry and don't do anything, at the same time, in the climate change crisis, have people dying. So I think this is not funny. We are not here just because we want to be away of our homes. We are here because we believe something has to happen. And to help this to happen, we can do in different ways, with cultural practices, with agriculture, can be with films, can be in high-level spaces, can be on the ground. We need to be creative. And just to finalize, I think if you close your eyes, please, one moment. Yes, close your eyes, I'm looking for you. I'm seeing if you're not close. If you close your eyes for one moment, I understand you can remember one person you love, or one food you love, or one place you love, and probably this person, food, or place is dangerous now. So if you open your eyes and don't are uncomfortable with that, if the urgency to act, something is literally wrong with you. Because we need to be angry, we need to be uncomfortable, but also we need to be optimistic, not because of the system, but because of we need that. And we can do. Any change in the world happen without the people, without the political decisions. And that's the reason the international cooperation and also the UN system is important. To face the barrier of language, the barrier of the different cultures, and make the things happen. Maybe on the ground, neighborhoods, cities first, but we need to do something. We can't be stopped just looking and watching. The decisions make it without us. So I think that's the reason the PYCC role also is important. It's recently, but also it's a key message about youth participation in FCCC.
Yeah, and ultimately, you know, people in rooms making decisions are just people in rooms like we're in now. We're just human beings trying to work out how we live on this planet together. And I think being together in that international moment can be just so unbelievably powerful. But it's not always perfect. I'm very proud of what the international system has achieved, but there are clearly some things it gets wrong. So I'd love to hear a little bit of your reflection on what do you think it doesn't get right yet, and what would you do differently so that it can improve?
I'll let Marceli start because I'm maybe still green and optimistic about all of this.
I think have some specific projects happen in many parts of the world with reforestation, with climate education, with technology, and have big ideas. I think I'm seeing reach from the Global Citizens Assembly. Global Citizens Assembly, for example, is one way to make a difference. We have the Culture Global Stocktake connected with the formal aspect of the Global Stocktake is another way to make the difference. We have a lot of children talking about nature and climate around the world. It is another way. So I think when we talk about what's wrong and what's right, don't have just one way to look for the political decisions. We need to be really creative and look around for people making decisions who make a difference today, now. And this difference needs to impact the life of, and the quality of the life for the people today and now. So I think this is the thing are wrong in the system. Don't have urgency, it's so much slow. But also connect everybody. We are in one London Climate Week with more than 100, 1,000 of events. This is people trying to be connected. This is not just because we came from here to face a hot wave together. It's because we believe be here together is important to create new ideas. And that's the part I think is going well. The people stay doing, the people stay trusting. If not, why we are in one room full of people?
The bit that I maybe would say I've seen not to be working so well is, so before stepping into this PYCC role and working with Marceli, like I wasn't, I suppose, as engaged in the UNFCCC space. My background is in agriculture and food, and so this UNFCCC specific climate space has been quite new to me. And in many ways, I've felt like a huge imposter because everyone speaks in acronyms that I have no idea about.
You did just say PYCC.
Yeah, I know, listen to me.
You're clearly getting the bug.
I'm really drinking the Kool-Aid over here. But I think what I've found is there's actually a huge inaccessibility to be part of this space because of the way we talk in here. And one thing I think we don't quite get right is just recognize that the language that people are using on the ground in communities is still really powerful and right in their own context to describe climate change, and that there is a place for the technical language and processes that we have in the UNFCCC, but let's not underestimate the value and the power that exists in community language. And I think, you know, when I'm talking about that, I'm thinking of my regional community, the story about my grandma, but I'm also thinking of Indigenous communities and of the Pacific Island communities who speak about climate change and nature through song and stories. And I think that is also an immensely powerful mode that we have to help mobilize people towards action, because it's kind of cutting through the noise and it's getting straight to what do people believe in, what do they care about, what do they identify with. So that's the bit that I think we don't value enough in this space.
Yeah, and we need to bring that sort of lived, personal, and that stuff is so powerful. So I worked on COP26 and I was traveling around with Alok Sharma, and it was during the time where a lot of the street protests, sort of led by Greta and many, many others, and people were out there, and pretty much every single minister we spoke to, they would talk about their children and what their children were saying about climate change. And I think that sort of cultural language that comes into it, it's so powerful, it's so political. So I completely agree with you. We need space for those kind of conversations, and they do change minds, and they do become the anecdote that the minister tells or the decision maker tells, and we need to bring that with young people.
Yeah, and I think when I'm thinking ahead to COP31 this year in Antalya in Turkey, and if you listen to what Minister Kurum from Turkey is talking about, it's the COP for implementation and action. And when I'm sitting there thinking, okay, how are we going to actually move beyond saying it's about action, but, you know, really helping people to start taking action. And a lot of that for me is the kind of meeting people where they're at and not thinking of this action, this era of implementation as a top-down approach, but rather enabling communities to do the work that many of them are already doing, but to scale that and expand that in a way that works for their context. So I think that's what I'm really excited for us to bring. And I think the young people and the children are the best place to lead that process, because we're the most connected to communities. We're digital natives, like we know how to connect innovatively and across boundaries. And I think that's the massive opportunity that exists in this COP31 for implementation. It's the moment for children and young people to be leaders in that space.
Yeah, I believe who built the system is the people, right? So when we are talking about changing, we are talking about capacity building, funding, space, and really pass the microphone for new voices and let their voices say what they need, what they understand, if they are in one indigenous communities, in one local community, in one periphery, in Australia, in Brazil, or in Turkey. They are feeling the consequence of climate change, so we need really pass the microphone for them and make this systematization of information go for one place when this come back with public policies, with best climate decisions, with political elections, with everything. This is not impossible. And I think my really goal for this year with COP30 is stay doing one civil society participation process for youth inside the UNFCCC system, because probably the adults have so much to understand with our vision about everything, and we have so much to learn about the systems. With intergenerational dialogue, we create a new system for everybody. One system will respect the nature, will respect the cultures, will respect the people, and we will just not say sustainable development, but we'll say about ecology, about cosmovision, about different ways to understand the future, but with action in the present. So the climate action also is that, is remembering the final of the day always is about people we love, food we like, places we remember when we close our eyes. If the negotiators do that more, probably they don't will say no for phase out fossil fuels, or they don't will say no for triplication for finance for adaptation. They don't will say no for movements on the ground, because they will remember. So if they forget, we need to remember them. We need to remember the decision makers about the importance of best climate decisions, not tomorrow, not in the another COP, in the another SB, in the another climate week, but today. Because our generation needs that. And also we are here to support with a lot of knowledge to share. So I think this is important.
I just want to add one other thing as well. Like when I look around this room today and some of the other rooms that I've been in this week and probably some of the spaces that you've all been in, like we're already on board. And I think what I think of is like who's not in this space. And for me, that's, you know, most of my community from regional Queensland who don't know these rooms exist or aren't part of these conversations. And so for us to really move to this era of implementation, getting stuff done, rebuilding public confidence and trust, we need to, all of us, go bring the other people from home, not into here, but just go bring them into the conversation about nature and about protecting the places we love. Not everyone has to understand this technical space. I think success is not that everyone goes to the COP or understands the language of the COP, but success is that we depoliticize these conversations. We talk about what we love, and all of you, homework, can you please go home and just start having those conversations with people who aren't here with you right now? Because I think that's when we can really build this coalition and this momentum of trust and action.
Thank you, and what a great note to end on, because we've talked so much about the importance of humanity, connection, the role of the international process to facilitate that, but also that we need to bring that humanity and connection into our own lives and where we start from. So I think that's an excellent piece of homework for everyone here. We will expect you to come back and tell us what you've had, what your conversations have been like. Please go and talk to people about why you're passionate about climate change. And I'm going to ask you to start doing that when we are getting off the stage. You've got a little moment of transition. Please talk to the person next to you about why you started working on climate change in the first place, because I am sure it starts with something that you love. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, water churn. Okay, we're going to get started with our next panel here. Please take all the conversations away from them. All right. How do we connect climate action with the public's everyday concerns at a time when trust in institutions is on the decline and the information landscape is fracturing? Our next panel will be moderated by Kate Hampton, CEO of the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, and they'll tackle this question of reframing climate action in the face of divided politics.
Hello. Well, it's lovely to be back in London. It feels like yesterday I was here, and my goodness, huge congratulations to the organizers. This is absolutely wonderful to be surrounded by people who care about climate change, who aren't afraid, who are doing real things. I was asked at a meeting last week, we hear a lot about headwinds, what are the tailwinds? And I said, we're the tailwinds. And there are millions of us, we're the tailwinds. So it's lovely to be here with all of you. Keep smiling, keep fanning yourselves. And we're gonna have a great conversation today with some extraordinary people, hand-selected by the E3G team. And because we're running a bit short on time, we're only gonna be able to have one question from each of them. But they've all got incredibly exciting perspectives from different parts of the world of making real progress. And Agnes, I'd like to ask you first. You've had an extraordinary career across DFC and launching Power Africa. And we know that maintaining political alignment through a long investment cycle is a difficult thing. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you've done that through your career and any advice you have on keeping investors engaged for the long run?
Thanks so much, Kate, and thanks to E3G for inviting us to this panel. It's like, as Kate said, it's an exciting week, and thanks to all of you who showed up to hear us speak. Yes, you know, political momentum is a bit of a balance, right? Especially nowadays when we have kind of several crises converging. We, of course, have the climate crisis, but now we also have the geopolitical crisis, which has led to the energy crisis, which I actually called the oil and gas crisis, not necessarily energy crisis, because energy, renewable energy, is now cheaper than a lot of the fossil fuels and much more affordable to most. But still, I'm here to really bring the perspectives of what's happening on the ground and the challenges that communities face. So the best way to really address all of these challenges and all of these crises is to focus on what's important, which is that, in my experience, the kind of projects, the kind of solutions that really survive any kind of political transitions are those that are solving problems on the ground for real communities. And that's because basically no matter who is in the office, as long as you're addressing issues that people are facing in their everyday lives, you will get support. So projects are not necessarily durable because they have political support because they're climate change projects. But really, projects are durable when they are solutions driven, and those solutions are solving issues, but at the same time, they're delivering climate outcomes. So it's really that alignment that's really incredibly important. And I feel that one of the ways to make sure that those solutions really hit all of that is to make sure that, first of all, they're aligned with what the national governments here, the Global Energy Alliance, I should mention, we work in emerging markets to really help build alliances of governments, philanthropy, and the private sector to accelerate the energy transition. So going back to what is important, first of all, national alignment. So whatever we do has to be aligned with what the emerging markets governments are really trying to do. Second, building broad coalitions, so removing the fragmentation that exists. In our experience, a lot of the energy projects are just focused on energy. A lot of agriculture projects are just focused on agriculture. How do we build the nexus between the two to deliver outcomes that are good for the communities, that deliver jobs, that deliver economic growth, and meet the climate agenda? And last, you need to really deliver that visible economic value to the local community. And let me just give you two examples. First, in Kenya, we partner with a local financing facility to enable women in Kenya to purchase and operate equipment that is basically refrigerating. It's cooling equipment, but it's refrigerators. And now, these women that are growing avocados, who used to have food wastage, or those avocados used to spoil because they could not refrigerate them, they now have 30 to 40% more avocados to sell. That immediately translates into incomes, And as we know, women usually spend those incomes on education fees for their kids, on better food for their kids. So for them, that has an immediate benefit that is really tangible. This is something that is incredibly important to remember. So they're not thinking of it as climate change. They're thinking of it as, I have this refrigerator that now arrives, that now allows me to have more income. Second, in India, we've partnered with a program of the government of India which allows women to have equipment to process chickpeas into baby formula. Now that is a great program, except those women, even though they are grid connected, had to get up in the middle of the night when electricity is cheapest and available for them to be able to operate that equipment and make this baby formula. We partner with a local company that provides, that helps them get household solar, and now those same women can process that chickpea flour during the day when their kids are at school and don't have to get up in the middle of the night. And by the way, they can use it for more than 3 hours a day. Before, they only had electricity 3 hours a day. So what they're doing now is instead of making 80 rupees, they're making 800 rupees. That is a huge change in their life. And obviously, not only is that a huge change for them, it's a huge change for their families, and they really see that and appreciate it. And by the way, talking about the heat, that woman that's sitting at that chickpea meal can now also afford a fan to cool herself off while she is processing that chickpea. And she has the extra income, as I mentioned, to really feed her children and to make her life a lot better. So I think that those kinds of solutions, while they're incredibly important for climate change, also offer those kind of practical solutions, offer the kind of jobs and income growth that really outlast any kind of political environment and that people will support no matter who is in the office.
Thanks so much, Agnes. I want to turn to Jenny now. I mean, we just heard the example of how many extraordinary benefits we can get from tackling climate change, and yet we're facing a horrible barrage of misinformation, disinformation, and confusion. Can you share with us the work that you've been doing, particularly given that now, even in places like the UK, where we had a really strong political consensus, climate change is being caught up in the culture wars. Please tell us how we can get out of this cycle of distrust and identity politics.
Sure, yes. I'm here to represent the trenches of information warfare, which is where I spend begrudgingly most of my time, steeped in conspiracy theories and sticky misperceptions and cynical weaponization of climate and energy politics. And I remember in 2024, I was at an event at New York Climate Week that was convened by the UN. And at that event, one of the most prominent climate scientists in the world said verbatim, "We have won the climate story." And I have to say, I was pretty shocked by that statement because as somebody who spends an inordinate amount of time looking at not only online discourse, but the impact that that's having in the offline world, I can tell you that that's manifestly untrue. But I think that there is a contradiction that currently exists in the data. So if you look at polling in pretty much every context around the world, you will find major majorities are supportive of climate action at the abstract level. So if you ask people, do they believe in climate change and do they want government-led action, they will say yes. And that includes European contexts, G20 countries, US, UK, Australia. But that support is paper thin. And if you scratch below the surface and start to ask people about the granular detail of actual climate mitigation and adaptation policies, suddenly that support falls apart. And that is really where information warfare is now being consolidated. The fossil fuel lobby is very aware that it lost its first battle, and its first battle was denying climate change. So we are in a very different place than we were in the year 2000, but that doesn't mean that we have got to a place where meaningful public mandates have been established. And just to give you, an example of how much this situation has eroded, so I often talk about the kind of 4 horsemen of the mis and disinformation apocalypse. And they are not like this, not us, not now, and it's too late. And pretty much every viral piece of content that you see that is opposing climate policy will in some way relate to one of those 4 horsemen. And if you look at a country like the UK, where, as you said, mere 5 years ago, we were hosting COP ourselves. There was an amazing analysis that was done by Carbon Brief that looked at editorials in the British press, so newspaper editorials about climate change. And in 2021, there were over 150 supportive editorials for climate action and basically none in opposition. In 2025, there were 100 against and only 50 in favor. So you are seeing a precipitous decline in not only coverage of climate policy, but actually favorable public discourse being brokered by legacy media that is talking about the realities of the transition. And instead, what you get are these kind of cultural conversations. Now, there is also something else happening, which is that lawmakers are very influenced by mis and disinformation. And that is one of the main targets of strategic information warfare, is to create a false sense of consensus. And because lawmakers, unfortunately, are quite influenced by news feeds and by legacy media, polling from around the world has showed that if you ask policymakers what they believe the public mandate is, they will underestimate it by upwards of 30 percentage points. 30 percentage points. So they believe that the public are anti-climate action, when actually the public are either agnostic or broadly supportive but need a little bit more information. And I think, one really good case study for how this is all playing out are extreme weather events. So there is a certain complacency within the climate sector that as more and more people experience the impacts of climate change in their real lives, floods, droughts, heat waves, increased storm seasons, that they will automatically become more supportive of climate action. And we have seen repeatedly that that is not what plays out in practice. That yes, there is a strategic window of opportunity where climate becomes a more relevant topic. So yes, it kind of rises up the pecking order of what people are interested in. But that doesn't mean that they de facto become advocates of climate action. And in fact, the kind of intensive trauma and precarity and loss of safety that comes through an extreme weather event is also the perfect fertile soil for people to become swept up in conspiracy movements, in the most extreme forms of climate mis and disinformation. And I would love to talk to people at this event today because I've actually just written a toolkit that is about how you build information resilience into disaster preparedness and response. And I interviewed a number of people for that toolkit, people who are on the front lines of emergency management, and they told me these are completely different tracks in government. Nobody who is working on frontline climate resilience, disaster preparedness and response is thinking about information dynamics, even though we now have 50 or 100 examples where crises have been thrown into complete disarray by the information environments surrounding them. And that has immediate impacts on public safety, in people refusing to evacuate their homes, people not believing what government messaging, but it also has these much more corrosive impacts on people's understanding of climate change as a driver for extreme weather. So it's the kind of continued politicization and weaponization. And I think where I just want to leave it is by saying, kind of bringing that point home, that information integrity has to be a part of climate action and the way that policymakers talk about implementation. And all credit to Brazil. I know we have the former COP president here, is that for the first time ever last year, information integrity was included as a formal work stream within the COP agenda, and Brazil has shown extraordinary leadership along with the UN in launching the Global Initiative on Information Integrity on Climate Change, which is a bit of a mouthful but has very good intentions. And that is a good step forward, but I would really urge the climate sector to stop viewing itself at the mercy of information environments as if it has no control over these things. It's constantly going to have to try and outcompete viral disinformation on social media. That is not a viable strategy going forward. And instead, as our youth advocates were talking about in the panel just now, we need to be thinking a lot smarter about trust architecture. And the fact that you can actually bypass news feeds. You don't need to rely on TikTok to get your message across. You don't need to be fighting your battles out on Twitter and on Facebook. Instead, you should be thinking much more creatively about who interfaces with the public on an ongoing basis. and why they might be incentivized to become ambassadors for climate messaging and to really broker that really needed dialogue with the public at this juncture in the transition.
Thanks so much, Jenny. I think you'll be getting a lot of traffic to your toolkit there, and this point about overcoming the information environment by talking to people, the theme from the youth panel. I also heard it very strongly from friends in Hungary who said very much, despite the disinformation onslaught, it was community and organizing that enabled that extraordinary election result. And so it gives us hope that even in a very difficult information environment, trust in the community can cut through, as well as all the things that you're recommending that policymakers in our community pay attention to. So in this very difficult environment, we're now very lucky to have two very influential politicians who are working in this very, very complex environment. And I wanted to start with Mayor Buffalo. I mean, we do hear a lot of doom and gloom from the US, but we do know that there's a lot of wonderful people like you working very hard. Can you explain to us what the reality is like in cities and states and how you overcome this very fractious environment?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I have to say, I feel a lot of pressure representing the United States. Like, I need to bring joy from what's happening in the United States to show that there's a lot of us working in this. And I think back to how do I show that we're doing this? Because we've done it before. So before I was the mayor, I was our sustainability manager for our city for over a decade. And in 2017, when then President Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, a bunch of us cities said, but we're still in. This is still important to our communities. So, we signed on for resolutions. We've passed our first climate action adaptation plan. We formed networks like Climate Mayors. So I'm the vice chair of Climate Mayors, which is an organization that represents over 350 cities, mayors in the community in the United States. I think we have something like over 60 million Americans are represented by our organization because we're working on this. And our goal is, that we really want to make sure that we are serving every climate solutions to build that affordable, resilient, and prosperous future. And so every president that we've had for over a decade, we continue to expand upon climate action on that. And I appreciate, Jenny, what you said about that paper-thin support for policy. And the way that we do this is because people don't experience policy, right? They experience comfort in a well-insulated home. They experience joy in a tree-lined street. And they experience having more money in their pocket by having lower utility bills. And so I am a mayor in a very conservative state that is very much supportive of redacting and preempting us from doing climate action, but our community continues to do it. We just might use different terminology for doing it, but I do talk about it, right? And so that the ideas around misinformation, I just bring it back to our local experience, which we hear at every climate week that you attend, regardless of the country that you're in. We talk about how it's impacting people's daily lives. And as a mother, I talk about my children, and I talk about the future generations and the investments that we're making for them that are improving their lives right then, but then also their future. So we just keep doing the work, and we don't let it get us down, and we focus on the joy and the love that we have for our communities.
That's great to hear, and that reminds me of, I'm a big fan of our own mayor here in London, who, despite the onslaught of disinformation, personal attacks, and a sort of a defeatist attitude from central government, stuck with air pollution measures and got supported by the public. So this is an example of really sticking to your guns. That's a horrible phrase, you shouldn't use it in this context, but sticking to your values and really working with people on what matters for them. Thanks for joining us. You're very welcome, and you don't have to speak for the whole of the US. I'd now like to turn to the Right Honourable Sam Ifeanyi Onuegbo, who is the architect of the Nigeria Climate Change Act. And I'd be really interested to hear for you, how did you make that something that really resonated with constituents and across different parties? is any of what other people are saying familiar to you, and how does that manifest in Nigeria?
Thank you very much for having me. Well, I would like to approach this question from the angle of community work. I'm a community-based person. I I was born and raised in the village. And while we were growing up, attending primary schools, in the morning we would rush out, whether you were wearing anything or not, to go and fetch water from the springs. In my village, we had 6 of those springs while I was attending primary school. So by the time I finished with primary, post-primary, and went to college, did my national service, which is a compulsory service that you do for 1 year, and then worked in some other organizations. By the time I got back to the village, just within a space of about 25, 30 years, I now discovered that 5 out of the 6 springs from where we used to draw water or used to fetch water, they had dried up. So it was not clear to the community what was happening. So when I was now opportuned to be elected to represent my federal constituency of about 3 local governments, I was appointed the chairman of House Committee on Climate Change. And then I started reading a lot of things. And I realized that even apart from the rivers, apart from the springs that had actually disappeared, then we were suddenly beginning to get big gully erosions and all that. So this things actually prepared me for the task. And when I pushed for the first time, I realized that there had been unsuccessful efforts in the past, before I got to the National Assembly or the Congress, to get a climate change bill. They had that effort, they made that effort in the 6th Assembly, it failed, probably due to lack of awareness and lack of interest. And then they also made another effort in the 7th Assembly. I got in the 8th Assembly, I sponsored the bill, and still, it failed. I now looked out and discovered that it was not just a question of lack of interest. I realized that within the bureaucracy, there were individuals who were benefiting from the system because they by then operated in silos in different locations. Nobody was, clearly accountable to the government. There was no central structure. So I had to work very hard, pull along my colleagues, and then based on that, we spoke to some of the critical ministries. Because, like when in those days we went to Harvard, you discover that if you are studying anything on leadership, just know that there must be power centers, and you have to look out for them. Otherwise, you'll run into problems. So I had to discover those power centers and work with some other ministers to be able to talk to those people. And then from there, we are now able to get the bill passed in the House of Reps, and then we moved it to Senate. But even at that, there was still resistance. But I'm happy that at the end of the day, I've been able, by the grace of God, not by my power, to contribute in a small way in creating awareness. And with that awareness and being able to get the bill to pass and assented to by late President Buhari, today you see that so many Nigerians have keyed into the issue of climate change. And on top of that, we have also had laws or acts of parliament that, for instance, the 2023 Electricity Act, that has actually opened up the opportunities and discussed issues of mini-grid to cover unserved and underserved areas. So this way, awareness is picking up and people are coming on board, and very young people are into that. And that's why in the Act, we have to make provisions for climate change to be taught in the primary, secondary, and tertiary institutions. In addition, we also provided in the law that in every ministry, department, and agency, MDA, that there should be someone that oversees a climate change desk, and that person should be not below the rank of a director. so as to be able to make provisions when you are doing appropriations, to be able to set aside money for your department and be able to process it through the PAMSEC and then get it into the budget. Such a thing never existed in the past. So in all, I think we have made some effort. And today in Nigeria, the issue of climate change, we are not bothered by what others are saying, whether in the US or elsewhere. We know, we have seen it, whether through desertification, gully or coastal erosion, and of course, the challenges that have coming from oil companies where you have spills. So I think we have made significant progress, and I'm happy that we're having the opportunity to have this little conversation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. And it's wonderful to have two politicians here who are showing bravery, taking risks, bringing people together. And politicians often don't get thanked, and usually less at home than overseas. So can we just give a round of applause for two politicians who are doing the right thing in leadership? Thank you. And it was lovely to hear from you, sir, about the work you're doing on accountability, but also building awareness, and how a multi-sectoral approach with decision makers is building their awareness, and in schools you're building young people's awareness. So it's great to hear. How you've been doing that. I think we're going to be on time. Do I get chocolate for that? I hope I do. Joanne. You have played a really critical role in the South African JETP, and we've heard it mentioned on previous panels as well by your counterparts in Indonesia. But the South African JETP was the first, and it was a long and complex process. But what is so admirable is the way that you've managed to connect the international negotiations in deeply local issues, and how you've created what others were referring to earlier as trust architecture, essentially, your own governance around it. Can you reflect on your experience, and what advice do you have for others who want to make those local global connections, who want to make finance flow, but who really want to reflect local opinion?
Okay, you're asking, well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting us to talk here. Our work is very increasingly national, but fundamentally this is an international program. It started from the agreement at the COP in Glasgow. At its heart, there is still an international partnership that is very active and that we've kept alive now, with very regular interaction for the entire period of the process. And it's fantastic for us to be in a situation where we can interact with fundamentally our partners on the other side in a more direct way. A lot of people have asked me this week in London whether the JET in South Africa still exists. And it does, and I think that talks to the issues that Jenny was raising. We are incredibly fortunate that we've had very, very strong political leadership for the work that we've done, right from our president down across government. And we talk about South Africa moving into a low carbon and climate resilient development path. So we've said that the only viable development path that we can see for our country is one that is climate aligned. And our president in every international forum that he attends will talk to it, and nationally as well. But in making the JET real, I think there are three things that we have had to do. The first thing is that we've had to pull together a governance structure for the work that we do that really brings together the whole of government. We have an interministerial committee. On it, we also have the representatives from the provinces that are most affected, in South Africa's case, by coal transition. We have representatives of our development finance institutions, and we are able to report into the highest level of government around the work that we do. So I think that is the one thing is really important, to keep that alive and real. The second thing that we've done is to say that if we are talking about a climate-aligned development path, it's got to be completely integrated into the operations of government. And the way that we work, I work in a delivery unit that is based in the Office of the Presidency. But what we have done is to identify the mandated bodies in government who have to lead this work into the long term, have to integrate it into their ways of operating, into their budgets, into the programs that they run. And we from the presidency have concluded MOUs with them so that we are driving climate action right into the heart of government. So that is the second thing. The third issue, and the most important, is really the work from the bottom up. South Africa is at the moment in a process of very big structural reform around our energy industry. We are in the early stages of what is going to be a long-term phased on of coal, with our integrated resource plan looking to another 5 coal power stations being closed down by 2030, largely because they are reaching end of economic life. But it affects a very concentrated group of industrial workers very seriously. And what we have done is to set up a set of institutions in order to be able to, from the ground up, to generate the kinds of initiatives that affected workers and communities would see that would really support them in the transition that is coming. We've set up a funding platform. We are trying to match illicit projects, provide project preparation support to those communities, and then ensure that the donors and the funders and the investors coming in are much more tightly and clearly linking what it is that they are investing into the needs that are coming from the ground. And I think that that is actually the most important part of the work. Missing, I think, is the information and public education piece, but I think it's something that we are starting to build alongside with the broader climate ecosystem in South Africa. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Joanne. And thanks to the panel for being so disciplined and thoughtful in your remarks. And talking of courageous politicians, I just saw Teresa Ribera walk in, who is one of the most extraordinary champions for these issues globally. So thank you for being here, and I'm sure everyone will stay for your talk as well. I just wanted to thank the panel. You're all working on very difficult issues at a very difficult time. And Joanne, the work that you've been doing in South Africa has inspired an entire movement on country platforms. There's now a country platform knowledge hub that was launched in Belém. Lots of countries, some focusing on energy, some integrating water and agriculture, really looking at a country-led approach. And this was a really important piece of the Global Partnerships Conference that the UK and South Africa hosted together here just a few weeks ago. So your work has had ramifications about the future of international cooperation. So huge congratulations to South Africa for the work and the generosity with which you share all the knowledge all the time. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Can we please give a round of applause to this wonderful panel? And I will hand back to, I'm guessing, someone who's going to, yes, somebody who's going to introduce the next one. Thank you very much.
Okay. For our closing keynote sets out what renewed cooperation could look like in the second half of this decade: multipolar, integrated, agile, with the political leadership and policy tools to bridge ruptures and rebuild consensus. And to lead us through that conversation is my CEO, the boss, Nick Mabie, and the Executive Vice President for a clean, just, and competitive transition for the European Commission, Teresa Ribera.
Thank you, Clarence, and I think we should give Clarence a round of applause for steering us through such a good day. We had some amazing panels here today, and we're going to try and release you into lunch a bit early because Teresa Ribeiro is going to go there, so we're not going to have too long a speech. But as well as the panels, there was an amazing speech by the Secretary General that you didn't catch. I do recommend you do, setting out a really powerful agenda for change and perhaps setting down some markers, particularly for the tech industry, I think, this year. So I'm just going to give some short reflections on where we've come from, some based on the panels, and then a few practical suggestions of where we need to go, and then Teresa will take us home to the end of the day in this amazing building. And just, I'm going to come back to the SADC. We've got to remember that climate diplomacy and the climate project is very young. I've been doing it for a long time, but I was there right at the beginning, or not quite right at the beginning. And it's probably the most successful diplomatic project I've seen in the last 30 years. If you just look at the outcomes in terms of temperature, investment, technological change, mobilization, and the $800 billion transferred from developed to developing countries, that's not with private sector leverage, that's the real number, over the last 13, 14 years. There's a lot of cooperation there. And it's done that. We've built that process through geopolitical turbulence. This is not our first gig as climate people. The US has been out or pretty much disruptive for 16 of the 30 years we're talking about. So the people, the coalitions that have driven the climate regime in all its glory, the COPs, outside the COPs, the Gs, all these different areas, it's the Europeans, it's the small island states, it's the vulnerable countries. It was South Africa in Durban getting the mandate for Paris. It was UAE pushing through the global stocktake and the process. We've always had multipolar leadership. We've always had interesting coalitions. The High Ambition Coalition rises and falls over time. But we're quite good at this. And in fact, I'd say climate is a model for the rest of the diplomatic space to deal with this turbulent time. And so we have a legacy of this multi-layered international system, which includes all the partnerships. There's 470 parts of the action agenda. I don't even know how many climate weeks there are now, but there's probably around 20, because new ones pop up every year. We have all the implementation at national level, all the cooperation. How do we make this work better with these headwinds? How do we use those assets we have going forward? And I think I'm going to take to task one phrase I hear a lot, which is implementation. We are doing a lot of implementation. 2.4 trillion a year is implementation. So people say, oh, you mean scale up? Well, yeah, scale up. But the problem with implementation and scale up makes it sound like we just need to do the same stuff but faster and bigger. And I think we're hiding the scale of the challenge. We actually need to do real innovation in the diplomacy, in the politics, in the technology, in the regulation, in the markets, in how we cooperate. And I think you have to have that mindset that we're trying to push the boundaries to do that. Because what we're trying to do is stuff that very clever, very well-meaning, well-resourced people have failed to do. Scaling up investment into developing countries by 6 times. Reforming resilience to protect the most vulnerable everywhere. Rebooting all city design. Totally changing the agricultural system. It's not the people, water systems, circularity. So these are big tasks that our current systems have tried and failed to do at scale. So let's remember that. And in fact, we have a double innovation challenge. Not only do we have to change the how we do things, we have to change the politics and the geopolitics around that to drive it. So let's not forget what we're building on, but let's not also minimize the forward challenges if it's just a cookie cutter process. It's a process that will require all of our energy and innovation. And then there are 4 changes I think we could immediately do to move forward right now going into COP30. The first one is, let's treat COP like a proper summit. Paris and Glasgow and Dubai showed what happens if you really invest in getting leaders to do things. The Gs are not going to do climate change. So for the next few years, let's operate a summit like a summit. We know how to do that. It's summit diplomacy, but get those agreements where we get the big choices. Secondly, let's build some new coalitions on climate reforms in the broader international system. Tomorrow, the World Bank will vote on whether it continues the Climate Change Action Plan or lets it expire. There are coalitions being built in Washington around that. We will need to do more of that. It will take effort and time of mainstream diplomats and EDs and others to do that who often do not own climate change and objectives. So we need to get better at that integration, defending what we've got, but also not just being on the back foot, pushing forward. Thirdly, for an organization that runs many international partnerships from many countries and with many partners, we need to focus and make these things work better. They were designed for a different era, for an era, particularly from Glasgow, on government-led partnerships to make things happen. We need to slim some down. We're already seeing some merging. We need to work out how they deliver better on the ground. And we also need to embed them in a process through the year. And I think the Climate Action Weeks are the space to do that. This year, out of our 1,300 events, 290 are related to the formal action agenda partnerships. So this is a place we are doing the prep work to go back to COP and say what's been done. And we can do the same in Rio and Bangkok and Shanghai and Baku and the other climate action weeks around the world. Let's make that machinery work for us, make the partnerships work harder, test ourselves that they need to deliver. And the last one, which actually was mentioned by Kate on the previous channel, subject of a big speech here, was we've got to change our cooperation institutions, and I'm particularly talking about developed countries. If we're serious about cooperation, we're going to do things differently. The JETPs were a bold experiment. Country platforms are a new experiment. There's still a lot of legacy mindsets, structures, approaches, sitting in ministries not too far from here, which say the word partnership, but actually mean donor-recipient relationship. And that really is not going to deliver. There are also some bright spots, what Denmark's doing with its industrial partnerships, Netherlands on flood defense, where people are sharing the best of their expertise and trying to forge really peer-to-peer partnerships. And that's really important. In the last thing I mentioned is we've got to stop talking mitigation adaptation. What countries want, and you heard it from the Ethiopian minister, they want to know how their country prospers in a world where climate change exists and the world is going to net zero. How do they make money? Which supply chains are they in? How do they prosper? Green industrialization, green development, call it what you like, is at the heart of this. Who's going to get what slice of the green pie? It can't just be China and Europe, which is where most of it is now. The consequence of the US not being in is for a country with 26% of the global economy only has 14% of the global clean economy. The US has shot itself in the foot economically. But we need to share the prosperity more broadly, and that's going to be a real challenge because that requires us to adapt our industrial policy, our trade policy, etc. So for the last 30 years, we've built a really powerful regime around climate change. It's got us a long way, probably half the way. The next half is not the same as the last half. It's more complex, but also it has more opportunities and involves more of us. And we've got to get into that both politically and in terms of cooperation. Because I think the last thing for me is it's not enough to say we're in a multipolar world. That's just a fact. It's just a fact of where we're at. The question is, can we run a multipolar world in a way that delivers for all of the countries in the world? And that's about leadership, that's about innovation, it's about thinking outside the box. And I hope we've moved the needle on in this conference and the rest of Climate Action Week. That, for me, is a real challenge we're facing going forward, but I find it incredibly stimulating, and I hope you do too. So those are my reflections, but I know Teresa has her own reflections, and I'm just so proud she's here with us. She plays an incredibly important role in the European Commission. Europe plays an incredibly important role in anchoring the progress over the last 30 years in the climate regime, and I'm just really interested to see how Europe thinks its role is going to evolve in this new reality we're all facing. Thank you very much, Teresa.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for inviting me to join you in this very important conversation. It's been quite a great pleasure to enter the room and to see many familiar faces, faces of friends, committed people that have been working on climate for a very long time in many occasions, and fresh faces that join this very important action, but also discussion, strategic assessment on how to perform much better. And yes, I am a very committed European, and I think that working together, building on that model, thinking on how we can work on an open market economy that keeps high standards in terms of environment and social references, but also that develops a kind of understanding towards the rest of the world that is based on mutual respect. Cooperation and peace is very important. And of course, there are many things to do, but climate is one of those aspects where none of us can succeed alone. We need to join forces to change the way we produce wealth, we assess and we invest in resilience, the way we develop solidarity, the way we transform the manner we have been understanding development for so long. And we know that our international system is experiencing a deep transformation, even it is being under attack. It's become a target. And this is a very dangerous aspect because I cannot figure out how we can build a better system if it is not based on cooperation and mutual respect. On the contrary, it will be much more painful, much more costly. So to a certain extent, we understand those saying that the old world is being destroyed, the new world is not clear yet. What do we do? And how this may impact on the way we work on climate. Think about uncertainty. We do not know what will come next. Great powers that seem to be proud of getting more power to be used on their own benefit, not even on the benefit of their people, their societies, but on the benefit of very few. A world that is increasingly fragmented, a world that affords denial. They believe that any nation acting alone can cut the ties that bind it to the rest is pure denial. It cannot be. It is impossible. And something that has not changed at all, and that is slowly taking over us all. Climate change is real, and I will repeat once and again. Climate change is real. Climate change is happening. Climate change is impacting our day-to-day life. It's creating additional suffering. The emissions keep rising, and yes, it is greenhouse emissions coming from humankind activity that is behind. And this is driving social inequalities that were already there, keep widening disruptions and damages that are increasingly frequent, more frequent and more serious. This is the truth we cannot escape. Whatever we think, whatever we see, whatever we hear, we cannot escape from that. But even in this fragmentation, we have never been so dependent on one another. We live in a world of complex and intricate interdependencies that may be technological. Think about the smartphone that you may have in your hands. The smartphones that we use carry parts from across the globe. Interdependencies that are environmental. A virus can halt the entire world for a year. Interdependencies that are energetic. 80% of the energy consumed still comes from fossil fuels produced in just very few countries. And there is a growing aspiration to rebalance global and local. And this is gaining support, and it makes sense. But one thing is rebalancing, and the other thing is to figure out, to trust that we can work each one on our own. That will never work. Some people may be acting through unilateral decisions, thinking that this can overcome the ties and ensure full control of supply chains. And that often means weaponization of key materials and services, no fair trade, no good results. These people may be thinking that building funding instruments that reward established and well-connected can help, instead of thinking that the innovators, the new solutions, are still to come. They disregard what consumers actually ask for. A cheap car usually carries a higher hidden cost. Let us be clear, even in a fragmented world, unilateralism does not work. None of us will ever be wholly self-sufficient. So, it may be challenging, but we need to think how we can work together in a more balanced way. Allow me to share with you the vision I still trust on, starting with a bold recognition. These interdependencies are here to stay. We may moderate them through diversification and resilience, but nobody can thrive in a bubble. The way we reframe the world governance needs values and goals. This is what we understand as a simple statement, as a primary statement, being very much in the core of the European Union understanding on how we can still work in a better world. I want to stand up and honor our people-centered policy vision, the respect for people and the rule of law. This is also climate action, including our climate law, the UN Charter, the SDGs, the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, the implementation, partnerships. This is why a committed defense of multilateralism matters as the only viable way for nations to live together. If to build a system that succeeds, we need a transition that is just and equitable. And I appreciate so much the Secretary General stating once and again the importance of paying attention to fairness and justice in this transition, to pay attention to the fact that we need to develop resilience, because it is an issue that deals with the creation of wealth, to ensure a high quality of life, to think about the others. That is the only way to ensure that we can connect back to our industrial base, to facilitate innovation, to create wealth, to build resilience, to build partnerships. It also means being wise in the use of natural resources, and fair on the social impact and the distributional aspects that connect to this deep transformation, both in terms of cost and benefits. Now the main challenge is how we can get organized to manage the interdependencies in line with those values. We think that we may need to keep on choosing two paths, cooperation and a renewed multilateralism. Cooperation can take many forms: bilateral dialogues, country platforms, structured coalitions around shared objectives, the movement to transition away from fossil fuels, to end deforestation, to tackle methane emissions, and the local leaders of C40 and the Compact of Mayors are good examples of all that. Then comes the harder part, how we can renew multilateralism. A multilateralism that delivers on implementing its core mission. With just 4 years left, we fear that none of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals may be met globally. Countries look like failing their side, and we still miss a global financial system that fits for purpose. How we can update the way we all sit and work around the same table and respect the same rules? The answer is not to walk away. The answer is to recommit to multilateralism in full, in truth, to discuss difficult topics, to accept that none of us will be gaining anything from getting destabilized societies elsewhere. This is not the moment to enter into a detailed discussion on how we can reform that, even if it could be very interesting in this room, I'm sure. But we know that the UN Charter remains the finest statement of our shared values. It is our common law alongside the agreements we have signed over the years. We must engage fully in multilateral spaces. On climate, this means turning up at the COPs every year and taking part with conviction. Nick was commenting on some elements that could allow us to improve the way we share, we meet in the COPs. But allow me to remind everybody in the room, can you figure out if we had intended to ensure an annual gathering of the civil society organizations, the researchers, the business, the investors, trying to speak, to cooperate, to exchange views, to discuss, to agree or disagree on the challenges about implementation? Do you think that we could have succeeded the way it has happened? Honestly, that's a common success. That's good. We can be proud of that. And yes, it may be truth that this positive reference to the rest of multilateral fora needs some fine-tuning. Yes, we know that this has set the bar for political ambition on climate and innovative formulas of cooperation, opening the space for the whole community. Yes, we also identified that we may need to figure out how we can defend the consensus rule at the COP, but at the very same time, to ensure that this does not prevent further ambition. It is the only way to keep full buy-in, and it never stops the willingness from moving faster. But it is time for the next step. We need political will to extend the COPs to the action agenda with all the stakeholders, to exchange and overcome barriers together, to ensure common ownership and delivery. And yes, the question marks on how we can keep on improving, changing, updating the global financial system that does not belong to this very same sitting, but it is very connected, is open. The South African and Brazilian G20 G20 presidencies have done their work. It is past time we deliver on their proposals. We have renewed cooperation to deliver is within reach. It is multipolar, it is integrated, it is agile. We cannot abandon that pathway. We need to fight for this being a success. And yes, as I said, the world is fragmented, but we are bound together. The complexities do not vanish, but together we need to master them. On the road from Bonn to COP31, after a session that was not necessarily very helpful, it is important to bear this in mind, to choose cooperation over illusion and conviction over retreat, to explain ourselves, to discuss among us, to find common ground, to identify where the difficult challenges may be, and not to abandon the table when we still need to work together. Thanks a lot.
I think those are good words to close our morning with, so I'll leave it at this. Thank you for joining us for State of Climate Politics 2026. We really are grateful for your time, and we look forward to seeing you for the State of Climate Politics 2027. Thank you.